Melody, Kane.
Yes, yes.
Yes. And you messaged me last week. Actually, this happened so quick. This is how you know when something's supposed to be, it will just, there's no struggles, no like, oh, I can't do this day. Just straight away, everything worked out. And now we're here a week later. After seeing a video of me and Alicia.
Yes.
Alicia, a good friend of mine, she did the art therapy series and she just spoke about her car accident and how it kind of initially saved her life. And that video kind of made you contact me. But if you just pick it up from there and then, yes.
So I literally was just kind of doom scrolling as I tend to, and I saw a video of Alicia and yourself talking just so openly and just so frankly about her experiences, the car crash that she'd have, how that had kind of shaped her path that she was on now. And I've been wanting to really share my story about where I've been for the last 3 years, why I just kind of completely disappeared from social media, left the UK, didn't really tell anybody apart from, you know, my few very, very closest people where I was going and why. And then I've just sort of popped back up again 3 years later.
3 years? You were gone for 3 years off the surface?
So I came off, I think it was about, maybe, I think the last time I was on social media before June was 2020. So 4 years, it was January 2020. So yeah, coming on to 4 years. Just stopped posting, stopped everything really, yeah.
And I mean, you didn't just disappear from social media, you disappeared from your social environment.
Yes, I left, you know, my social environment. I, you know, left my, I don't say I left my friends or my friendship group, but I, you know, kind of had stepped away from that, stepped away from everything. You know, it wasn't, I didn't intentionally sort of step away from individuals it was just a complete, I cannot process my life as it looks, as it has always looked. You know, I need to just completely step away and try and work on this healing that is you know, really, has really like set root inside the trauma, and I can't pretend anymore, essentially. You know, I was essentially sort of like a very highly functioning, you know, they say there's like highly functioning alcoholics. I was like a very highly functioning person with severe trauma, if that makes sense.
Yes, and sometimes this highly functioning is a trauma response to run away from
yes.
all the things that we got going on inside. It's like, oh, I don't want to think about that. Let me achieve. Let me socialize. Let me go out. Let me be that bunny, that social bunny. And I mean, when you called me and we had this conversation of like me kind of like figuring out if covering your story would have like a positive impact on my platform, you kind of started with your story of growing up in a very dysfunctional home. Yeah. And I think, speaking of that, if you could just start with like your story of where you're born and how your upbringing was to like maybe a bit, you know, that's how you kind of like start your story from the beginning, yes.
So I was born in like a very small little seaside town down in West Sussex. I was actually born in Rustington and grew up in Amring in a place called East Preston, which is down on the Sussex coast, somewhere kind of in between Brighton and say like Eastbourne that people may know. So it's like in the middle there. My mum, you know, came over on Windrush. She came over when she was 11. And she moved to Birmingham, and you know, which is where a lot of the Jamaicans went. And she met my dad when she was in her 20s. So that's where they met. My dad's white English, my mum's Jamaican, and they got married and moved down to this tiny little town.
How was it back in the days being an interracial couple? Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, I do. And actually, so I have my memory of the things that I saw, and then actually subsequently I've read my mum's journals, and it's actually, you know, really traumatic what she went through. This was, you know, the 70s when they moved down. It was the 80s when I was growing up, and I remember things. I remember being, you know, people would shout half-caste at me in the street, but I was very young, so I didn't, you know what that meant. I remember my mum had a banana skin thrown at her. I remember people would be very abusive, very very rude, you know, all these things. I think as you get older, you understand, you know, what those things meant, where I didn't at the time, and just seeing my mum constantly in distress. So where we grew up, it was very, you know, very sort of middle class environment. I say that in inverted commas. So it was very much I use this term loosely, you know, the polite racism. You know, it obviously wasn't polite. It was, you know, very, very traumatizing. But it wasn't on the extremity of violence. It was very much segregation.
Okay,
in terms of my mum just feeling very segregated whenever she left the house, and then also the home environment being extremely toxic. My parents were, you know, there was a lot of physical and verbal abuse.
Really?
Towards each other. You know, it was a very violent household, and then subsequently there was, you know, a lot of, you know, we like to say in the black community, our elders like to say discipline, but it was, you know, it was above and beyond, you know, that
against
kind of,
you as a child.
yeah,
yes.
Against myself and against my brother. Not quite as much against my brother, but definitely,
really?
yeah, not quite. Still, you know, it was still there. I'm not going to say that it wasn't there, but
you got it more.
I got it more. I think because I was a girl, I think my mum really struggled with her relationship with me and my brother. He was, again, I've since read, you know, journals, and Robert was apparently a lot more an easier child. I was very sullen. Apparently, that's what I read. Yeah, I was the second child. Yeah, I was very sullen. Yeah. So it was just a very confusing environment to grow up in.
So do you believe like the relationship between your parents? Because it's very interesting when I think about your dad being an Englishman and back in the days, racism being rife, and then falling in love, I guess, with a black woman. Did he have any? What do you think was going on within him? Do you feel like he was racist as well? Because, you know, there's a lot of white people that get with black people and they still hold very racist values. You know, I can vouch for that. Also being mixed. And do you think that the racism directed towards your family kind of also plays part at how the harmony within your household? Because I'm thinking, if your mom was attacked like that, must your dad not have felt some sort of like helplessness? Because initially you want to protect your woman, but maybe he couldn't. Do you think that something in that direction played a part?
I think, interestingly, I think that I think with my dad, I think definitely, you know, perhaps it was more the people that were in and around him or family, etc., that may have held those views. I honestly think my dad, and we'd had this conversation, you know, a few times, but I hadn't really gone too much into depth, but he was enamored by my mum. I think it was the kind of opposite of that. He was married before he married my mum.
Oh,
There's some confusion about whether, you know, I've never really got a clear answer whether they met and then he left that marriage to be with my mum, or if that marriage had already ended and then he met my mum. So there's some confusion around the timelines, depending on who you ask. But, you know, he was very much, he was married to a very, you know, a white woman from Birmingham. My dad was born in Birmingham. When my mum met him, he was a lorry driver. He had a very, very bad stutter. And he met my mum at a party in Birmingham. Beautiful, beautiful black woman, extremely eloquent, very intelligent. She was a nurse. She was very independent. She was incredibly articulate. And, you know, he said when he met her, the words he said was he'd never met anybody like her. He was completely enamored by her. Where that kind of goes, you know, sour in my mind, because that is, you know, initially a beautiful sentiment, is that I feel that, which is what I feel happens with a lot of black women, is that was then taken and utilized, and, you know, his life elevated greatly. He's a very hard worker, so, you know, I'm not saying it's not that he didn't work hard. He's an incredibly hard worker. But my mum supported him through him going to night school. She was constantly working nights as a nurse. He, you know, became a computer programmer. He went to evening school and just, you know, learned everything he needed to know. They opened a business together, a publishing company. He went to speech therapy classes. So he transformed, you know, it's a meme now, right? The black wife effect. Like it's a meme that we laugh at now, and it very much kind of focuses on looks, but you know, my dad really received the black wife effect. You know, his life completely elevated, and you know, my mum believed that they were a team. Unfortunately, there was a lot of trauma in my mum's childhood, and there was also a lot of trauma in my dad's childhood. And those two individuals, who I believe very much did love each other when they met, had never worked on their own individual traumas and brought that to the marriage, and it just fell apart. It was extremely toxic. I don't believe that my dad showed up for my mum the way that he needed to. I don't believe that he protected her from the experience that she had as a black woman, because times when I tried to speak to him about my experiences, he wasn't able to navigate that conversation. So
I mean, black people generally often don't prepare themselves for what's to come.
Right.
Yeah.
He
not to make an excuse for him.
No,
but
no.
It's something that.
I mean, I remember when I found out that he had voted Brexit, I was so angry. I was so hurt. I didn't talk to him for a really long time, because I just thought the audacity of you know, voting for something that stops immigrants coming into this country when, you know, you married an immigrant.
It's the same thing. That's the same thing that happened in my household.
Right.
Literally,
Yeah.
my dad was talking about it the other day when my dad was like, "Yeah, your mum one time voted for the Conservatives," and he was just like,
yeah,
he was just like, "What's going on?" And it's
crazy, right?
Yeah,
it's crazy that like that
and,
narrative.
And because these people love this person and not the people,
right?
It's like they look at that's my wife, I love her. That's my children, I love them. That's where it ends.
Yeah, yeah. My dad.
This is a problem.
It is a problem, and I definitely want to be mindful not to paint my dad as something that he's not. You know, with my dad, I think that there's an avoidance. He doesn't really. He didn't understand how to have certain conversations. There's an avoidance with conflict and not having the self-awareness to do, you know, the work on himself to deal with those, you know, those issues that he had, so that he would then be able to be somebody that would be able to have uncomfortable conversations. I think it comes from, you know, a place of lack of education in certain areas. And also there was an awkwardness because my dad had two other children with his first wife.
Wow.
So he's got two very, very white children.
Yes.
And then myself and my brother. And I never felt that, more so as an adult, you know, I definitely felt that there was a detachment that he had with me. But that may just be a detachment that he has in general.
Yeah, it might not be personally you in Manchester. How do you feel your parents' relationship kind of affected you in your early romantic relationships? Like, you know, because when we start dating, we kind of like replicate what our parents did with each other, and our self-worth is also so connected to how we were treated. And how do you think this, you know, dysfunctionality affected you, you know, entering like the early dating scene?
It massively affected me. My barometer of what was acceptable and what was normal was completely skewed, and it took me a long time. You know, there's still probably elements of that now, but not in the extremities that there were. You know, my daughter's father, I had my daughter, my only child, Rosa, when I had the day before my 19th birthday, and he was extremely, you know, abusive, physically, mentally. And, you know, I was young. I think at the time you don't really realize I was 17, he was 27. So there's an element of looking back and seeing that was, you know, that I was groomed, but I you don't look at it like that at the time. If not groomed, then very inappropriate. And yeah, he was extremely, extremely violent. When I was 7 months pregnant with Rosalie, pushing me down the stairs. He was very, very physically abusive, very physically abusive.
And do you feel it's like for you it was normal because that's what you've seen at home?
So I never want to say that it was normal because I was always in fight or flight. So my body was physically always reacting in a way to show me this isn't normal. However, I think I was desensitized. There was periods then where I would, see my dad and I would have black eyes and he wouldn't say anything. Or I would say, this person has done this, and he wouldn't, there wouldn't be that protection of getting in the car and driving there and kicking down the door.
Wow.
It was very much, not a justifying of it, but a very much, this isn't something that I can emotionally handle. And that is the thing that I have, my first few relationships were very physically violent, but I grew to a place of understanding that that's in no way acceptable. But the thing that has carried over is me, to this day, choosing people that don't stand up for me, choosing people that when there's situations where I need them to support me and have my back in that moment, that they don't. I still to this day have been choosing people that don't show up for me in that way. And it's definitely not been a conscious thing. I think obviously that's a level of trauma that still hasn't been worked on. That then means I'm attracting that. I'll perhaps focus on other qualities, or it just feels comfortable to me because that is the father wound that hasn't been healed, is that although I still feel that level of pain, that feeling in my gut when it happens, my body fights between this hurts, but this hurt is familiar to you. What would it feel like in your body if somebody actually did show up for you in that way? You'd feel amazing, you'd feel good, but you don't know what to do with that. You don't know what to do with that feeling of this masculine figure making you feel safe and protected. That's not a feeling you recognize. So we're just going to, align ourselves with that feeling that you're used to, because that's where we're comfortable. That's the battle that my mind and my gut kind of has. And I'll never forget a time, and it happened so long ago, but I still remember it so vividly to this day because I remember the way it made me feel. I think I was maybe 19 or 20, I was quite young. Rosa was only a few years old, my daughter. And we'd gone to my father's for Christmas, and he had married again. At the time, she wasn't his wife, she was his partner, and she has her own family, grown up children, etc. So I spent Christmas there, and it was very much a thing of, I always felt that she was tolerating me. I never felt fully welcomed myself or my daughter fully welcomed. And I was planning to be there for the week. It was Christmas. Her family were coming on the Boxing Day, and she asked my father to take my daughter and I home because she didn't want to ruin the aesthetics. And my dad did. My dad asked to take us home and took us home. And it's something that I've never, I actually did bring it up to him, years and years later, a long time later, when I'd started working on my emotional intelligence. And he did apologize, and he did say that's one thing that he, regrets more than anything. So it is, sorry, I'm getting choked up, but so he did apologize, and there was that realization. But as a very young girl, as a single mother in that moment, that feeling of the masculine figure in your life choosing other people over you, and it was very much kind of sold to me by the male figures in my life, my father, on other occasions, my brother, regarding other things, that, you always choose your partner. In whatever the situation, you always choose your partner. So I'm like, okay, as I got older, I saw that understanding in that, you always choose your partner. Then the confusion came when my partners aren't choosing me in that moment,
like,
you know,
what?
so
It's my time now,
so it's,
yes.
yeah, it was like that confusing.
Wow, yeah.
Okay, if this is the way that it is, that you always choose your partner, I can understand that, but then why is it that my partners aren't choosing me in that moment? So that's been something that I've had to navigate.
And have you thought about, my mum always, like, she's quite on an like esoteric path as well, and she's always like, I mean, my I don't have that subject of choosing so much, but she always asked me, but are you choosing yourself?
Yes, no, and that's literally what I was about to say, is that I truly believe that when I am choosing myself in every moment, then I will, you know, that person that will always choose me will come, but I need to choose myself. And what I mean by not choosing myself is in situations that are perhaps, you know, emotionally or physically destabilizing for me, I will go to toxic patterns of behavior. So emotional eating, you know, not taking care of myself, shutting myself away, binge watching things on Netflix. And all these things are a way of knowing that I'm not choosing myself. To choose myself is to get myself to the gym, go for a walk, read a book, you know, meditate, be out in nature, pray, you know, eat super healthily.
Have fun with friends.
Yeah,
like, do something that you will enjoy,
yeah.
that is good for you. Is so true.
Yeah.
About the choosing yourself. And people, not just men, but people, there's a certain type of person, they have like a sixth sense for people like us.
Yes.
Because I have that in me as well. I'm working very hard on to choose myself as well. And they have like a sixth sense. And, you know, sometimes life, it also tries to, you know, it's about keeping the high frequency, and little things sneak in to get you back in that toxic pattern, and you just have to stay on top of it and keep on every day choosing yourself. It's a lifestyle.
Yeah, it is.
It's not just a thing you just do here and there. It's a lifestyle, and it's so hard.
It is. It is hard, and I can see for me, because I have ADHD amongst other things, I thrive with structure. So I can look at periods of my life where I've been really thriving and happy and comfortable, and it's when I've had that level of structure. Even though, you know, my life as a DJ, it's very much, I love the fact that I'm a free spirit. However, there needs to be a structure for me in that to thrive. And what I mean by that is, you know, being up at a certain time, straight away, you know, going to the gym or training, praying. There's an amount of things I need to do before midday for me to have a successful day.
I'm just like that, exactly one-to-one, yes.
It will literally be, you know, praying, going to the gym, journaling, all these things that, you know, now I'm in a space, and I have been, and I'm coming out of it slowly, where I haven't been doing those things. Everything has declined. You know, my mental health, my physical health, my wellness, my fitness, my weight, everything has declined, and it's because I need that. I need that level of structure.
Yes, yes. And getting into, you know, you telling us about being a DJ. So, I mean, you said you had your daughter young. How was that anyways, like, you know, being a young mom? How was that, and how did you then delve into, what was your career path then, and what is it now? If you can like have maybe start from being a young mom and then delve into what you did for a living then, and how you got into DJing.
Yeah. So being like a young mom, a young single mom, I was just focused on doing everything I could to, you know, create an income for myself and for Rosa. So I primarily was, and I guess there's still an element of that, especially as a DJ, I was in sales. So I was always like a very good salesperson. And so I would, you know, when Rosa was young, I did everything, you know, I was a carer, I cleaned people's houses, I had many different jobs that I would do just to do cash in hand work. As she got a little bit older and started going to school, I actually had 3 jobs. So I would take her to Breakfast Club in the morning, and then I'd go to my first job. At lunchtime, I'd go to another job. So they were both in like sales. Then I'd go and get her from after school club, take her home, and I had a good neighbour who would come after I'd put her to bed and sit up at the house, and then I would go and work in the pub over the road from my house. So this was my life for a long time.
Wow.
I always knew that I wanted to be a DJ. Like, I'd always loved music. It was very much been just a part of my life.
Yes.
And I was very fortunate that it was something that I very much wanted to do. I had some sort of what I know now are God-ordained moments that took me to that. But I was very blessed to meet somebody that was a DJ and that was in that field, and that person really kind of like took me under their wing and helped me and encouraged me, showed me the ropes with regards to equipment, told me what to do, loaned me their equipment, and really just kind of helped get me started. Rosa was still fairly young. Like, I hadn't wanted to start DJing while she was young. So I kind of I'd started around 26, 27, so I started quite late, maybe 25, but I kind of went sort of full-time professional, gave up my day job at around 27, 28, yeah.
And what made you take that leap of faith? Because, I mean, that, creative careers is only becoming a thing now, and, you had a daughter, and what was that moment for you where you're like, okay, I'm going to take this serious now?
I think I was just always like a little bit of a diva. Like, I just knew that I'm not meant to work for anybody else. I think I don't want to say I had a problem with authority, but I just feel like whenever I worked for somebody else, there was always an issue.
Yeah.
And the issue, obviously, I can look back now with emotional intelligence and say, no, like, the issue was you. Like, the issue was you. But I just never, very much, and as I've understood and learned that I have ADHD,
yes.
I now understand it's an ADHD thing, but I would never kind of be able to stick at anything. I would never sort of be able to, I'd have all this excitement for whatever I was doing, and then the novelty would wear off, or I'd fall out with my boss or this or that.
Yeah.
DJing was the only thing that I've ever stuck at for this long. Like, literally, it's going to be like the kind of like the 20th year anniversary of me DJing, like next year, like being like full time. And so it's the only thing I've ever stuck at. So I think I just knew I really wanted this, and I really believed in my heart. I think when I was younger, I wasn't laden down with the emotional burdens of understanding my trauma. So I think when I was younger, I was very much like, I can do anything, I can achieve anything, I can do this. And I know it's more kind of when people sort of paint a narrative of, as you get older, then, you feel more free, you can do everything. I was kind of like the opposite.
I thought it was the opposite, like your conviction, just kind of like the world happens, life happens, and things bring you down, and people tell you, oh, it's not realistic.
Yeah.
When you have to be delusional to succeed.
Yeah, and I think I was, and I was really focused, and I really worked hard, and I think there was just certain elements at the time that not a lot of other people were doing. There wasn't really any kind of hip hop DJs so really out there. There was some that were amazing. Like, there's Nikki Beatnik, who I always looked up to. She's still doing her thing today. She's amazing. She's Khaleesi's DJ, and she's been doing her thing for years. But kind of like female hip hop DJs, there wasn't really that. I learned on vinyl, and I was playing on vinyl. I was always comfortable to host and talk on the mic. And I was just, I would pride myself on being very, professional. I didn't drink. I wasn't a drinker, so I wouldn't. There was just certain things that I think, aren't really a big deal now that really mattered back in the day that people weren't so much doing. So I think I looked at like a market and thought, I can see how I can fit into this.
Yes.
At the time, it was literally the very like strong, positive, and not aware of how my trauma would affect me in that environment version of me, that kind of went into it. And I worked really hard, and I'm never going to downplay like how many opportunities I created for myself, but also how many I was given as well, and how many opportunities I can look back now that I was given, and because of my trauma, fumbled the bag, essentially. Other people always saw what I could be much more than I think I saw it. Even though I was very, you know, confident and motivated and focused, I think the reality when I was in those situations, that inner voice, like the unhealed inner child, was always like, oh, you're not safe, you know, you're not doing well enough, you know, that inner voice, the criticism. So I would get in these environments,
yes,
and I would be, you know, set to have that level of success. But then I would kind of like, my insecurities would screw it up for me, and that manifested in different areas, you know.
So how would that manifest?
So, I mean, probably like say like an example of, you know, I'd always wanted to be on One Extra. And so I had, you know, worked on various different radio stations, and I'd been offered opportunities. I was doing like mixes for them for about 5 years. And then I finally got a residency on there. So it was myself and 3 others. There was like I think it was like 6 months residency or a year-long residency. But there was like 4 of us, so we'd do a different day of the month. And subsequently, like all the other 3 people that I did the residency with are all on there, thriving still to this day, doing amazing. I think there was just a deep insecurity in me that I'd been able to hide really well in a lot of other situations. I think I was then in an environment where other people could see my insecurity, and I think that started to, I don't know if it came across on air. I don't feel like it did. I don't think it did. When I listened, but I don't think it did. But my insecurities, I definitely took into that building with me, and that isn't a place where you can openly be insecure. I think there was always the feeling in me like I always had imposter syndrome, which was, you know, I would be in environments, I would be at events, I would be at festivals, you know, of tens of thousands of people, where I've just come off stage, you know, DJing, like literally come off DJing on the main stage, and I'd be in you know, in the back rooms or backstage with my peers, and I'd feel like I didn't deserve to be there. But I knew that I deserved to be there because I'd worked so hard to be there, and I knew that I was talented enough to be there because I'd just done what I needed to do and been successful. And, you know, people were always very, you know, I would get a lot of bookings, so I knew, I know that I'm a good DJ. But I think it was when I was in those environments, I think just that bravado that you needed to have, or I don't even want to necessarily say it's bravado, because there's people in the industry that don't have that bravado and are very successful.
Yeah.
I think sometimes you can just see it in a person, and there's a lot of darkness in the industry, as there is in a lot of industries. And I think that darkness...
How is that expressed?
Sometimes it's really hard to express what that is when it's very feeling led, but I would walk into a room and I would instantly know that it isn't a safe place for me. Wow. And that sounds dramatic because obviously it is safe, but emotionally it's not safe. There's a tour that I went on, and I'm, you know, not even gonna kind of go into the details of that, but when I came back from that tour, I literally spent a week in bed, and I was so emotionally drained. And on that particular tour, nothing bad had happened, essentially, sort of to the naked eye. But there was just a lot of, I think it's when they see that you're the weaker duckling, there's a lot of picking apart.
Maybe not the weaker duckling, but, you know, in the industry, a lot of people are into like very dark things, let's call it like that. Yeah. And when they see like you're also not drinking, you got your head screwed on, and when they see like you're not part of that, then they just like see you as a weak link, or they see you as an imposter. Yes. Somebody that potentially would speak up if they see something, so you automatically imposter, because if they start doing what they do and you see it and you're not part of it, then you have to get out, because these are not things that is to be shown to people that are not up for them.
Yeah.
Let's say it like that.
You know, I think there's a lot of things people are prepared to do and a lot of things people aren't.
Yeah.
And, you know, I'm never going to say that I had a front row view to kind of any of that. I'm just going to say that I think I would agree with you that there's I think people can see certain energies in some people and not in others. And I never really felt like I belonged.
What I kind of want to talk about next is like when you're talking about how you fumbled, what, you know, your opportunities or what you had, the success you have. Can you talk about like your highest point of your career? And you always reach the higher top and then it goes all the way downhill in a way. Can you talk about your highest moment and then how it kind of like trickled down and why?
Yeah, so honestly, my career was I knew that it had never reached that place where it could go, but it continued to be really good. I'm you know, so grateful. I have traveled all over the world. You know, I've been visited so many countries. You know, I've had amazing experiences, done amazing things. I continued to do what I was doing without understanding that I have C-PTSD, that I have complex PTSD, or they call it childhood post-traumatic stress disorder. And so I didn't realize that was what was wrong with me. So I was navigating my career just thinking that actually it's just a weirdness inside me where I will be super affected by something somebody says, and I will carry that and hold that, and I'll continue to think about it, you know, for the next 3 weeks. Or if I make, you know, a slight mistake or on a mix or mixing something, that I will then obsess about the fact that, you know, my set wasn't perfect. All these little things that would deregulate me. I just thought that it's something weird with me. I didn't actually understand that I had a condition. Things that were happening would really, really affect me deeply, but I wasn't understanding the trauma that I had that I needed to heal from and how to process those things so that I'm able to face different situations in a much more emotionally regulated way. So I honestly think that the thing that actually derailed me in the end, I was still continuing to, you know, be successful. The thing that actually made me stop was COVID. You know, my father passed away in 2019, and that was really hard, but I didn't stop. That's a time when I probably should have just taken a moment to grieve, but I didn't stop. And then COVID happened, and I stopped. And all of a sudden, this huge wave of grief and trauma and confusion just hit me because, okay, what am I doing now? I can't keep myself busy with work. I can't, you know, distract myself from the inner child that's crying out inside me to be nurtured and loved. I can't dumb her down with traveling and DJing and fitness and, you know, healthy eating and all these other things that I'm just like, sure, shut up, you're fine, you know. Everything stopped. So then she just comes out and is screaming, you know, is literally. So I'm in COVID and I'm feeling all these very, very confusing feelings. I had started seeing a therapist just before my dad had passed away. I knew he was going to pass away, and I'd come out of a very like kind of toxic relationship. So I started seeing a therapist, an amazing woman, which I don't believe I would have kind of the level of emotional awareness today that I have if I hadn't started seeing her. She really opened my eyes to a lot of things. She's the person that kind of introduced me to complex post-traumatic stress disorder. Yes. And she, you know, said that you know, you have this thing. At the time, I wasn't in a place of receiving the things that she was saying, so I just took that, put it somewhere, didn't think about it again. In COVID, I actually started thinking about, okay, what is this C-PTSD?
Yeah, can you explain it a little bit more as well?
So complex or childhood post-traumatic stress disorder, the difference with PTSD is that it's normally associated around an incident of, you know, great traumatic effect that happens once. So that's why, you know, in a car crash or people returning from war or you know, different things that can cause a lot of trauma. You know, even a breakup, even a traumatic breakup, it's very much a situation that you have to process, but it's essentially a one-time thing or for a short period.
Yeah.
When you're a child that's grown up in an extremely dysfunctional environment, whether that's been through you know, physical stresses, sexual stress, sexual abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse, even children that have been adopted can suffer from C-PTSD because it's about not being able to regulate in the moment. And what I mean by that is when you're in a situation where you are constantly in a state of confusion, you never feel safe because you don't actually know what's going to happen. Day to day, there isn't a regularity of events. Every day, you're not sure what you're going to have to face, which was basically my childhood. You know, I didn't know if my dad was going to be there or not be there, if he was, you know, going to be drunk, if my mum was going to be extremely angry and aggressive. Every day was, or if they were going to be, you know, physically fighting. I came home one day and my dad was jumping up and down on the bonnet of my mum's car, and my mum was keying the top of his Alfa Romeo and the neighbour, and we lived in a very like affluent gated community. The neighbours were all standing outside their house, just looking, and I literally, you know, walked home from school and walked into this scene. I'd say it with a bit of a laugh now because you know, every day was like that. So you're constantly in a state of disarray, and what happens is it affects you neurologically as we're growing up. From babies from the age of you know, birth to 7, it's essentially where our brains are being wired and shaped. So your brain is wired in a way where you are constantly in fight or flight, or freeze or fawn. Those are the kind of like the 4 aspects essentially of how you process your emotions. You never feel safe, and so the way that you deal with things is to deregulate. You know, coming home to those scenes, you have to almost kind of separate yourself. It's why it happens a lot when children have been sexually abused. When that's happening, they have to almost just come out of themselves, to just deregulate, to separate themselves from any feeling in their bodies. To just, so you get so used to doing that becomes a permanent way of being. Now, unfortunately, what happens into adult life, something big or small can trigger that same physical, emotional response as an adult. You know, your brain essentially doesn't realize, okay, you're an adult now. So if somebody says a little something snidey or you make a mistake on something small, rather than being able to handle that like an adult, the physical feeling I get is that same sort of pain and knot in my stomach. So my body says, oh, we recognize this pain. That's the pain you felt when, you know, you came home and your mum was chasing you down the road with a belt in front of all the neighbours because you couldn't tell the time. And so everything inside my body goes, disassociate, disassociate. And so what happens is I disassociate. I almost sort of liken it to, if I'm trying to think of a physical way to describe it to somebody that hasn't experienced it, I'd almost say sort of imagine taking, I guess, like 5 Valium. You know, you're kind of there, but you're so fuzzy, you know, like everything is fuzzy. And so trying to kind of navigate adult life when small things are triggering you and you're constantly disassociating, and then you're constantly trying to come back in your body. And of course, it's different for everybody dependent on their childhood experience. You know, whatever were those triggers as a child will be connected to the things that disassociate you and trigger you as an adult. So for me, going back to, you know, the safety and, you know, partners protecting me or keeping me safe, anything around that will trigger me massively because of the triggers that I had as a child. Anything around not feeling like I'm good enough, or I'm not excelling or doing well, will trigger me massively. Anything where I feel that justice isn't being served or people aren't believing what I'm saying, especially when it's regarding other people that are maybe doing wrong, is a massive trigger for me. That stems from trying to tell people when I was younger, you know, trying to tell people at church, trying to tell people at school, you know, this is happening at home, you know, please help me, and not being believed. And then not only was I not believed, to sort of cover the facade of the fact that I was trying to get help from outsiders, my mum and dad actually got a psychiatrist to come to the home and do like a psychiatric report on me. All of this, I remember it now, but actually I'd completely forgotten about it. It's only when I went through, you know, my mum's documents and things that I found this kind of report that basically said that I am a compulsive liar and that I was, you know, like a problem child. I had like a very high IQ, but I was, you know, essentially a problem, causing problems. They had this report like typed up, and then they took it to the school, they took it to the church to essentially say, you know, she's a liar. So anything where I'm trying to tell people this is happening, and the person
to get out of the abusive space, and they're just making you like, you're the liar, like you're making this up.
A complete liar. And so anything where I'm, you know, with somebody or very close to somebody, and I'm saying to them, this person's doing that, or be careful, and they're not only are they not believing me, they're not standing up, like it's a massive trigger for me. And I can see that this is a pattern that has played out in relationships where I have inadvertently chosen people that have continually triggered that trauma in me. You know, even the relationships I've had with you know, good people, you know, good men, good heart, like good people. Strange, well, I'm not even going to say strangely, but there's always been that part that they can't protect me.
And it's interesting because now thinking about it, like, because it's your trigger, not theirs, that might be something that's not even that deep to them. Like, you can be friends and you telling me something, I'm like, come on, like, I don't believe you, Dad. And you go home and you're like, oh my God. And I'm just thinking, I just didn't, like, it's not a big deal. Like, I just don't see it like that. But for you, it's this big thing. And I think this is the thing about triggers. I just noticed it as well. Like, for you, it's this big thing, but that person is very oblivious to it. They don't really think, okay, maybe it's not a nice thing, but they don't think it's gonna hit somebody that hard. And
100%.
We in a world now where we do feel like we have to walk on eggshells with everyone, but at the same time, we do a little, because there's so much coming out now. It's a public consciousness thing of people like healing and wounds bleeding. You know, and
I agree with you.
You know, we really have to be really careful with each other. And
I never want people to, and I think that's the thing, which is why even, you know, nobody would know any of this about me apart from, you know, the people that are the closest people in my life, because this isn't, you know, something that I would want people to know. You know, it's very, like, even just speaking about this today and being this vulnerable is like very uncomfortable for me. But it's something that I just, you know, feel that I want to do. So even that, expecting people to kind of, is not something that I've ever expected. For me, the hurt comes from when you're the closest person in my life or someone very close to me, and I have explained to you in length not only what my triggers are, but why. You know, sat down with you and explained why they are like that. And then you still let me down in that way. That's what I can't get over.
I'm telling you,
that's
the
the pain that, you know, is very hard. I don't expect, you know, this person or that person to know or even understand my triggers or to pussyfoot around them. I don't expect that. But it's when that person, I've not only explained to you that these are my triggers, I've literally given you a presentation, a PowerPoint presentation on why, and for whatever, for honestly, for their own reasons and their own triggers and their own childhood trauma, they're not then able to accommodate that. But that isn't a them problem, I think, because the first time somebody does that, now it's about being somebody where the first time somebody does that, I'm able to identify this, whatever this is, friendship, relationship, cannot continue because you are incapable or not willing or whatever it is for your own reasons to be able to keep me safe in that area. And that's just one of my absolute necessities. There's so many other things that aren't necessities that I'm fine about, but that is a necessity.
But you know what I realized, actually, within the romantic connection that I have at the moment, I realized that every time somebody does it, especially when you did tell them already, like that is very triggering for me, and you say how and why and everything, that person actually has the same trauma and the same triggers, but they're just taking on the other side of that.
Yes.
And what you're essentially doing is trauma bonding with that person.
Yes.
And even though you're telling them, they can't even hear you because they're in their own trigger with you. And it's like a trauma can have two sides. Like somebody can grow up with an alcoholic dad and become an alcoholic, and somebody can grow up with an alcoholic dad and it's like, I never want to like see alcohol in my whole life or taste it. And those people usually get together and play and dance the dance.
Yeah,
you know?
I'm laughing because I've been dancing a dance for a while where, without even going into it, where it's, you know, I didn't have that level of affection when I was growing up. So I've gone the other way. I'm, you know, my primary love language is physical touch. I'm very affectionate. Whereas, you know, somebody else that maybe had the same experience of not having that, they'll go the other way and you know, just not be comfortable with physical touch, or it not be, you know, something that they're, so it's really interesting what you're saying about how you just end up with that same trauma that manifests in different ways, and then you do this kind of trauma bond dance.
And like we said before, I think the ultimate answer to it is getting to the point where you don't need that person to believe you or stick up for you, because you're choosing you. And you're choosing that, you know what, I'm not that little child anymore that needed somebody to save me. I'm grown now, and you kind of like hug and hold your own inner child and be like, I don't need that person to do anything for me. I mean, we do need people, but initially it starts there, and then it will align in the outside. And I mean, I can only, I'm not saying that, it's not advice, but this is how I kind of like trying to make sense of the world and these kind of dances you dance with people, not just romantically, but mainly, but so I just try and really get to that point where I'm like, okay, I told you this is my trigger, I told you X, Y, Z, but you know what? I don't need you to do that for me because I'm doing that for myself now, and then everybody else will align. Easier said than done. But but
it is simple in a way. And what I've realized is that actually probably 80 to 90% of the situations that I've then become triggered by, because there hasn't been that aspect of protection there, 80 to 90% of those situations are situations that I wouldn't have put myself in if my inner child was healed. And what I mean by that is, there's obviously, you know, just situations that happen in everyday life, etc. But I can identify that those situations where I've, you know, needed somebody to show up for me or whatever, I'm in that environment or that situation or at this place, and I know deep down, like, I shouldn't be there. And what I mean by that is that this situation has got to a point where now you're not sticking up for me, but it should have never got to that place, because I shouldn't either be involved in this, or I shouldn't even be a part of this, but it's that, I think there's that brokenness for me that has been responsible for putting myself in certain scenarios or certain situations or certain dynamics that would then mean that I need sticking up for. And going back to what you're saying about sticking up for yourself, sticking up for myself right at the start would have been to not even be there. Do you know what I mean? I'll give you an example of that, without really going into detail, but going to an event or a dinner where there's, you know, there's people there where I know the energy's off, the energy doesn't align with mine. There's some, but I go anyway. And then going in that environment, and then, you know, the people that I'm not sure about being very rude or you know, so it ending up being exactly what I thought it was, but me going into that thinking, oh, I can handle it, you know, knowing that actually to know and love yourself is to know that actually you can't
choose
handle
yourself,
that. Just don't go. You know, you shouldn't have gone. So now you've gone, and now you're upset with somebody for not sticking up for you in that environment. But if you'd actually protected yourself, you just wouldn't have gone.
And I must honestly say the scenarios that hurt the most is when you knew you shouldn't have gone or you shouldn't have done that. You still did it. You disregarded your intuition, and now you're here.
Yeah.
And that pisses me off the most.
Yes.
I must honestly say, because I've been in a situation where I really didn't know. I really thought this person, or I really thought this situation. I was blind. I literally didn't see it. And then I was like, okay, I didn't know.
Yeah.
But when you know what your intuition told you exactly X, Y, Z, and you still decided to do whatever you do,
fast up yourself and go there. Yeah.
And you can only blame yourself. I mean, but it's also a great learning opportunity at the end of the day. But yeah, that one is very painful. Let's just towards like the end now. Let's get into basically we stopped at your father passing away, and then obviously from your father passing away to you moving to Kenya, to you disappearing off the surface. Let's bridge that gap.
Okay, yeah. So obviously my father passed away. I hadn't processed it. COVID happened. So I was kind of sitting down in COVID, trying to process it, feeling all these emotions. Was actually meant to go on holiday with my ex, the one that I said it was very toxic, and a week before we were due to go away, which was in the January of 2019. So a week before we were due to go away, he was just like, oh yeah, no, I don't want you to come anymore. And then he just went with his friends. He was a narcissist, so there's, you know, those manipulation things that they do for fun. And I remember just praying. I just prayed, and I just said, God, where, you know, what do I do? Where should I be? At the time I had, you know, I was very like spiritually just really in alignment with God at that time. And God just said to me, Kenya. Now, my friend, a friend of a friend, she's Kenyan, and she had gone back home. She was already there. And I remember just reaching out to her saying, oh, you know, if I've never been to Kenya before, they're like, if I come, can you recommend where I should go, etc. And so it just turned out that I booked a flight to Kenya. My friend, bless her, she got some family members to meet me when I touched down in Nairobi. Then they put me on a train to Mombasa. And it literally was like a series of events of alignment. I met up with my friend. We went to an orphanage and were doing some, you know, work with the children and helping out. And then we kind of went our separate ways because she went, you know, off to a different part of the country. And I just remember just looking up a place to stay. I think it was just on booking.com, and I just ended up finding this lovely little cottage in this compound. And the family that owned the compound were lovely. Just, you know, became friends with them. And it's weird to, I guess, try and think of how it kind of ended up, but it just became a thing where, you know, I just, you know, kept renting the cottage there. And just as the time went on, I continued to be there. Now that actually happened before my dad passed away. So I was actually in Kenya. Then I got a phone call saying that, you know, there's not many more days now. He was really ill. He had cancer, he had stage 4 cancer, and he actually survived for 4 years. They only gave him a few months, but he survived for 4 years with Weedall, but that's another story that we won't go down. But so I got the call that, you know, he didn't have long left. So I actually jumped on the plane and came back, and yeah, he passed away. So then I was kind of like stuck in the UK because of COVID, and then I went back. I was in Kenya, like processing my dad passing, processing life, and my mum, who had Alzheimer's, had dementia for a while. She had actually got to a point where she wasn't eating or swallowing anymore. So I came back, you know, spent the last few weeks with my mum, and was set to go back again straight away. after my mum's funeral. And then 2 days after my mum's funeral, I got a call that my best friend had passed away.
Wow.
And at the time, my world just collapsed in. I'd coped with my dad. I was kind of trying to cope with my mum. This was all in like the space of a year. So my dad passed, then like a year later, my mum, and then 2 days after my mum, my best friend.
Wow.
So I can only describe it as literally like everything just imploded. I feel like my body and my mind just folded like origami. Like it's really hard to remember stuff from that time. I think I would look back and probably say like I had a complete mental breakdown, but I don't really know how to describe what a mental breakdown is, so I don't know. I just know that I became debilitated with pain, with grief. I would be constantly disassociated. So I remember just kind of like coming to one time, and I was like, I'd walked around the streets literally just wearing like my nightie and my sliders, like, and
Sorry.
my friend, no, it's crazy. Like my friend that I was staying with at the time was like running around the streets looking for me. But I was like, when I think back now, I can't even really remember leaving the house. I can remember just sitting outside on a doorstep in my nightie and my sliders, just
So you completely
rocking.
disassociated, that you almost created two different people.
Yes, I completely disassociated from myself. I almost imagine it's a little bit like, obviously it's not the same, and I don't know because I've never been schizophrenic, but
I was just thinking
that there's the level of, interested you saying that about schizophrenia. That's what they put on my mum's death certificate. They didn't put that she passed from dementia, Alzheimer's. They said schizophrenia is what she passed from.
Interesting.
And so even now, just sitting here realizing that maybe there was a level of that, I separated.
It's disassociating from
I completely
yourself,
disassociated.
And it takes on its own life.
It took on its own life in a way where it's very hard for me to remember the things that I was saying or doing at that time. But I just remember being in so much pain. So I stopped everything. I stopped, my healthy eating. I stopped training. I stopped journaling. I stopped everything.
You gave up.
I gave up.
Yeah.
I literally gave up. I sat in bed and I just emotionally ate. My health really suffered. I'm now just at the point where I'm just starting to get back into the training and try and get the weight off, as I put on 4 stone just from grief. I didn't care about anything anymore.
Yeah.
I didn't care about DJing, which is like the thing I've always been the most passionate about. It hurt to breathe. Mm-mm. And I'm just at a point now where I'm putting myself back together.
You need to take it in doses, isn't it? It's not, of course, yes.
Yeah, I'm scared that if I get to a place where I feel like, emotionally I'm a lot more together now, so I can try and handle this. I'm very fearful that trying to delve into that will just topple everything. And it's been 3 years of me not stepping away from my life, and now I need to kind of get back into living my life, into DJing, like executing the plans that I have for myself, working on my health, working on my fitness, working on all the things that make me again. And I'm very fearful that if I try and process it, I won't be able to. So I'm kind of coming to a place of being triumphant in some aspects, but very much still just being on a journey where I'm not able to sort of hold up that flag and say, yes, this is what I've been through. This is how I've got through it.
You're in the process.
I'm in the process,
yes.
I think.
No, but thank you for being vulnerable and for doing this
Sorry
interview. No.
Right.
So what I actually wanted to know more is about Kenya. Like, what else did you learn there about life? That because you lived in the village.
Yeah.
So obviously, what did you learn from like the people that lived their lives there?
I think like just what I really learned is just about there's just so much beauty in simplicity. There's so much joy in just focusing on the here and now, being in the moment, In Kenya, you very much, you wake up and your task for that day is to do the things that need to be done for that day, essentially.
Yes.
Especially where I was living in the village. So, your day is taken up with, taking care of the home. Like, every morning I would go in my garden, pick fruit, eat that for breakfast. It's very much a way of life that I was living, was all about being in the here and now. I wasn't planning or even thinking of anything in the future, which really took me away from a materialistic mindset. I'm just thinking of, you know, am I making sure that the house is clean? Am I making sure that I've got food? Am I making sure that my dog's fed? Am I doing the things that I need to do for today? So I found I was living like very much for each day in the moment in Kenya. Whereas here, I'm very much kind of like thinking and worrying about the future. The one thing I really understood about being in Kenya was just how much my body and my mind needs to be in, connected to the motherland, and also just in a place of warmth and abundance when it comes to resources, when it comes to, food, when it comes to air, when it comes to water, when it comes to so many different things that are maybe to people that have never visited the continent of Africa would look at those things as being much more beneficial in the West. But for me, waking up every morning, walking down to the creek, swimming across the creek, eating fresh food, my vitamin D constantly being topped up with the sun, being in an environment where I'm just very, it's a very, very, very like God loving and God fearing place, where I was, in Mombasa. So, there's a very strong like spiritual energy and connection there as well. Those are things I know for me that are really important for me to thrive. Um, Really understanding more than ever, because I'd never been ill before this period of grief. Really everything affecting my health, having all these health scares, getting fibroids, endometriosis, having some cancer scares, really a lot of issues going on with my body, and understanding that what I need to feel wealth is to be in a place where my health can thrive, where I can, obviously have enough to live comfortably, but the most important thing for me is to be able to be comfortable in a place where my body and my spirit and my emotions can thrive and be at peace. So that's like my focus now. I'm back here, focusing back on work and just trying to, really focus on getting myself to a place where I can then go wherever it is I choose to go and build the life and community that I want.
What would you say? Obviously, you say you're not at your point of your journey where you're like, oh, I made it out. You're still in the process, which is something we have to celebrate more in a way as well. Even though it's like nothing like yay, but
Yeah.
it's like it's not just about like the end product. It's like the process as well that is a celebration, and at least to have the awareness to know that you're in that process,
Yeah.
and that you're gonna get there at the end, but just being in that process and not necessarily being like, oh, I have all the solutions, but where you are right now, what's the kind of like wisdom or that you've drawn from your past few years of life, where you can say at least you learned
Yeah.
that.
Honestly, I think just being like, completely open and vulnerable. I honestly think just feeling proud of myself that I'm still here. Like, there was many times where I was disassociated to the point where I I didn't think that I would actually be here anymore, because it got so bad. There were times when there were things that I did to speed up that process. It was bad. It was really bad. So I think just being here, being able to just be very like open and honest and vulnerable about it. It's something that I find really hard. I find like I find like people being really I wouldn't say being vulnerable, but people being very like open about every aspect of their life on social media. I
Yes.
find it really cringy, and I know
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
really
yeah.
bad, but I just, it makes me cringe, and I really struggle with that. I know it's an amazing tool and platform for people to see like there's other people struggling, but even just kind of sitting here and doing this, I've found like you've made it amazing, but it's been hard because it's just being this vulnerable.
You want to
I'm just,
disassociate.
yes,
Yes.
and I
Yes.
haven't. I have really like kept in the moment. Like
Yes.
like my inner child has really been trying to disassociate. Like, shut up, don't say that. But it's, yeah, I
Yeah.
have sat in it. So I think even just being here, like surviving this, I think surviving this, like there's so many kind of traumatic incidents that have happened in my life that maybe other people would look at and be like, oh wow, like, you know. But I guess because I was always disassociating, it was just seemed normal to me. Like when I first met my therapist, she said I literally went in there and it was like I was just reading from a shopping list of these things that had happened and I had no emotion. And she would be like visibly shocked by the things I was saying, as in like, you know, that's a big deal. And I was just like, you know. So I think getting to a place where I'm able to really look back and understand who I was, who I am now, and who I'm going to be, and just the fact that I'm still here today when I I just didn't know if I would be. So I think I've really learned to try and ensure that I fight back against the desire to make permanent decisions based on temporary feelings.